Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's round-the-clock online action. In our segment, we demand no layoffs, protect health insurance, and a new deal for CUNY. I am Lynn Turner, Chapter Chair for the Graduate Center PSC, and I'm co-hosting our segment together with Pam Stenberg, Vice Chair at City College, and Rosa Skillicote, our Vice President for Part-Timers. We are raising up demands 4 and 5. Adjunct faculty and staff, graduate employees, continuing education teachers, and CLIP and CUNY START instructors, and any other PSC represented employees laid off in 2020 for budgetary or programmatic reasons must be reinstated in their positions or in comparable positions with no loss of accrued benefits. All PSC represented employees who have lost or will lose eligibility for health insurance because of budgetary or programmatic layoffs must be restored to eligibility with no loss of coverage. No one should lose employment or lose or not have health insurance amidst the pandemic. The coronavirus pandemic is but one of multiple pandemics of chronic underfunding, austerity, of racial inequity, and more that our university, our students, and our communities confront. It has been maddening that the CUNY administration, rather than taking a firm stand against further neoliberal budget cuts in a system that has already been cut to the bone, often opted for preemptive cuts towards those in the most vulnerable positions. We were dismayed to hear Chancellor Felix Matos Rodriguez state during a recent state higher ed hearing that disbursement of $132 million of CARES Act funds was being withheld. Nearly 3,000 adjunct faculty who teach the majority of undergraduate classes across CUNY were not reappointed, with many hundreds losing health insurance. Positions of non-teaching adjuncts and college assistants have also been cut or relegated to month-to-month status, putting in danger jobs and health during a public health and economic crisis. We have come together in our union and campuses to fight these cuts and have won back positions in health insurance for many, but many are left out in the cold due to CUNY's intransigence. We will hear these stories as well as our call to action in this segment. We will begin with speakers from our recent Vigil for Lives Lost and Those Threatened, with speakers from the Graduate Center, BCC, Medgar Evers, BMCC, and Kingsborough. Then we join a live exchange with Luke Elliott Negri and non-teaching adjuncts, and we close with our call to action as we step up and escalate our fight. And please invite your colleagues to join us now and throughout the 24-hour action. The link to participate is in the ribbon at the bottom of the screen, and also see the crawl for calls to action while we're in the midst of this segment. Thank you, and on to our video.
I have a list of 45 individuals who have succumbed to coronavirus since the beginning of March. It's a long list, and several of them may be names that are familiar to those of you who are listening. They were represented by the PSC. They are our colleagues, in some cases our friends. We are not naming the several others who have been lost. We don't know much at all about students who have perished, and we know of about a dozen people who worked in security, who worked in maintenance, who were college assistants represented by DC 37, and also at least one administrator. So this is a list of those who were with us and represented by the PSC. Jean Weissman, Tom Waters, Carmen Valle, Jorge Zambrano, Joseph Tusiani, Jose Tubilleja, Leonard Trugman, Aaron Tenenbaum, Arif Talukdar, Lucienne Cispiro, Ralph Steinberg, Michael Sorkin, Babette Salon Hollister, Paul Sheldon, Joel Shatsky, Darlene Salter, Eve Rosius, Melody Reed, Daniel Padovano Gulak, David Nacero, Juliet Manra, James Lujan, Perry Kalick, Jay Jankelowitz, Donald Hoffman, Ray Hubler, William Helmreich, Georgiana Gloss, William Gertz, Dennis Fox, Dr. David Ernst, Dr. William Tullio de Valle, Asberth de Silva, Jaime de la Hoz, Richard Curie, Anita Crumpton, Marianne V. Cooper, Paul Klein, Rashmi Christian, Marilyn Chernin, Thomas Burgess, Joseph Brostek, Peter Brancazio, Samuel Borenstein, Mark Blum, Dr. Joseph Bertarelli, Moshe Augustine. No words would be adequate to describe all these losses in the time that we have. And we cherish the notion of having a full memoriam service that we could attend together. But we do have the offering of one student who wrote for the CUNY Memorial website. We know this student only as SB, a biology student at York College. SB wrote, "Shining a distance hardly perceived, your collective light is boundless. And through those of us blessed to have seen, will a way for many be lighted." The student continued, and we share in this sentiment, "With deepest condolences and gratitude for these souls, may each family find respite and grace."
Hello, everyone. I'm Rosa Squillicode. I'm the Vice President of Part-Timers at the PSC. The names that Zabby just read included my good friend, Tom Waters. I wanted to talk about Tom for a minute because he was special to me and because everyone who has died was special. Tom was a father, a friend, and a true activist scholar. He was essential in the New York City tenants' rights movements. He was always available to provide feedback and advice on research and writing. And this is a cliche, but it's true. He was just a really good guy to have a beer with. And I miss him deeply. While much of the COVID crisis has been unavoidable, the response from political and administrative leadership exacerbated the crisis. While Cuomo has received some praise for his handling of COVID, and especially when compared to Trump, he and the CUNY administration dragged their feet in responding to the pandemic. While the union was fighting for workers to be allowed to stay home, Cuomo and CUNY kept colleges open for weeks after public health experts urged caution. One report found that if New York State had closed down earlier, thousands of lives would have been saved. And I often wonder if Tom would have been one of those lives. Not only that, but during the height of COVID, Cuomo passed a budget that not only cut funding for hospitals and Medicaid, but also cut funding for CUNY. Cuomo slashed CUNY's budget at a moment of peak crisis. Dozens of our colleagues have died, thousands are out of work, and hundreds have lost or will lose health insurance. This is unacceptable, it is intolerable, and it demands that we act together to resist and fight back and protect our colleagues and comrades that we still have with us, protect their lives, protect their health, and protect their jobs. The imposed budget crisis that CUNY faces, despite receiving CARES Act money, has reverberations beyond just the layoffs as well. It's recently come to light that because of CUNY's budgetary incompetence and lack of transparency, many adjuncts will get late paychecks this semester, late by a month or more. We don't know the full extent, but we're urging everyone who has a class this semester to check their status on the AEMS system to see when their hire went through and to contact us if you think your pay will be late. This crisis extends into all parts of our lives. We urge everyone to join us in the struggle to demand that we save lives, save jobs, and save CUNY. We will now hear from other workers who have been directly impacted by the cuts and layoffs CUNY and Cuomo have decided to impose on us.
Hi, thank you all. Thank you, Lynn, for your introduction. Thank you for the reading of those names, and thank you broadly PSC for organizing this really important event. These are the times that actions are the most vital. So my name is Michelle Gaspari. I'm a doctoral student in anthropology. I'm a tuition-only fellow, and I'm the co-coordinator for organizing and planning at the CUNY Adjunct Project, and this is where I focus specifically on the fight to end two-tiered funding of doctoral students at the Graduate Center through the Project Full and Fair Funding. And this is obviously work that I got involved with for personal reasons, because I, like a third of all current and incoming doctoral students at the GC, have no funding apart from a 5-year tuition waiver, and some students receive not even that waiver. I wanted to speak today to shed light on my fight to ensure that I have medical insurance and the means to live in the fall, because as a tuition-only student, I do not have access to NYSHIP, which Graduate Center fellows do. So last year, I kind of circumvented this problem. I got a grad assistant B with the Health and Wellness Center as a health education coordinator. This gave me $11K a year and NYSHIP access, but like so many, as Lynn mentioned earlier, my fellowship was cut for this upcoming year, as was my supervisor's, and will not be renewed in the fall. And I obviously don't need to harp on the paradox of erasing the jobs of the two remaining health education employees at the GC in the middle of a pandemic. I lost funding, I lost insurance, and early this summer I scrounged for adjuncting so that I could get on NYSHIP, and I was extremely lucky to find this work. But as we know, however, hundreds of adjuncts have lost their jobs and their insurance, especially at Brooklyn College, at the Borough of Manhattan Community College, and at City Tech. As a tuition-only student, I now prepare for recurring anxiety and instability each semester, hoping that I can remain adjuncting so that I qualify for NYSHIP. The contract ratified in December of last year by the PSC set up the infrastructure for expanded access to NYSHIP. However, here we stand 8 months later in the middle of a pandemic, and there have been no implemented changes in students' access to health insurance at the Graduate Center, and lives have been threatened and lives have been lost. Unfunded students stand at a particularly precarious position without a baseline of enough income to live and the provision of the human right that is medical insurance. CUNY management, in the contract with the PSC, has allocated the money to fix this life-endangering problem. So the question is, what is taking so long? We must see a firm and rapid commitment from CUNY to secure non-contingent access to healthcare for all doctoral students. It does no good to mince words. For CUNY to drag feet on providing health insurance for all doctoral students in the middle of a pandemic is an act of violence. Swift structural change is needed from CUNY leadership to secure equity in funding and health insurance for all doctoral students. And I hope that PSC will push hard for the livelihoods of tuition-only and underfunded doctoral students in the midst of this crisis. Thank you so much for listening.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. And I just want to add that I myself am also a underfunded student, also having come in with just the 5-year tuition fellowship. And as such, I have also lived, as many others, as Michelle said, a third of the doctoral students at the Graduate Center. The sort of month-to-month, semester-by-semester struggle, right, to scramble to come up with health insurance, to come up with employment for the next semester, at the same time as doing what we can, and we do succeed, but it's quite arduous in meeting our timeline and meeting the time to a degree. And we have come together, both as our union, as well as with the Full and Fair Funding Project that Michelle Gasparri was referring to press for an end to this sort of two-tiered funding system and for health insurance for all doctoral students. And as Michelle said, there was $750,000 that was allocated in the last contract. And unfortunately, CUNY has shown very little urgency in coming up with viable solutions to provide these students with health insurance, to ensuring that this two-tiered funding system ends in the middle of a public health crisis. And that really needs to be ended immediately. You will see soon a tweet that can go out to our new president at the Graduate Center, Robin Garrell, who has now just begun. We've spoken with her about this situation, and we hope that President Garrell will step in and will do what is right and what is necessary in order to settle this issue, and certainly in order to provide an equitable health insurance funding system within that accords with the contract that was actually settled 8 months ago. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So my name is Yasmina, and I am, or I used to be, or maybe I will be, an adjunct professor at the BCC. I'm also at CCNY, which I did get reappointed for my one class there. But the Bronx Community College, after 14 years of working there, sent me a letter. They actually sent me a brief note letting me know I am no longer needed. Now, I do want to say the irony of that is that I spend more time explaining to a water bug in my house why they can't live in my apartment anymore and why they need to go than CUNY spent on composing a letter that basically just said, great, you've been here and now we don't need you. So it was extremely disappointed to get this letter, not just because it affected me, I lost my health insurance, I lost my livelihood, but it's also because it just felt so deeply disrespectful compared to how much time and energy and effort I have put into working at BCC. I came to the United States as an international student myself. I escaped a war in my home country of Yugoslavia, Bosnia, for those of you who remember the 90s. I studied and I worked here, and somewhere between luck and privilege, I got my green card through a diversity visa. I'm a child of a Muslim and Christian parents, and I exist despite the fact that people like me are not supposed to exist in this world. I'm a proud queer non-binary person who is expected to hide in the shadows, but I'm living my life publicly and joyfully. I am a grandchild of freedom fighters who fought Nazis in World War II, and I'm here to tell you that it is time to say enough. It's enough already to all this CUNY nonsense, all this exploitation that has been going on for how many years, how many decades. I think every year we keep hoping CUNY will do better, and they just keep not. This week, or maybe it was last week, we all received that email from the chancellor. There was the mass email where he tried to blame the union for all the adjuncts firings. Because the union asked CUNY to have the decency to tell us if we're teaching or not by June 30th, they are now pretending like the reason we're fired is because of the union. CUNY is stringing along, as we heard, college assistants month by month, and they're asking them to prepare for, or they're asking them to basically just show up every month, not knowing if they'll have a job next month. They're expecting adjuncts to be preparing for fall classes without actually making commitment to us that we will have those classes. So now I'm in a position where I might or might not. I will probably maybe have a class in the fall. I have no idea what this means. So I'm supposed to basically work without getting paid for it and hope that that work that I'm putting in will pay off at some point. Chancellor has, and I was trying to find the actual article where this was cited, so I'm going to paraphrase because this really stuck with me. He told us that CUNY is not in a business of employment or hiring, and he's basically trying to pit students against the faculty. He's trying to make it sound like somehow our jobs are at the expense of students, which is ridiculous because students need faculty to be there to teach the classes for them to take. And I also want to say, if CUNY is not in the business of hiring, then why have they hired 4 new presidents, as they keep telling us proudly? And, you know, this is nothing against those individuals because I know nothing about them, but it's sort of like, are these presidents going to teach the classes that they are taking away from the grad students, from the adjuncts? And why is it okay to hire people on top when you are not hiring people who are there to clean the buildings, to teach classes, the college assistants, right? So we're all supposed to sit around and hope for the best, but these upper admins are getting their contracts and their salaries. Bronx has been my academic home for 14 years. I have created connections there. I have made friends, and I'm proud of my students, and I hear often from them how they're doing now. I was often working on Sundays, so I was often one of the very few people who was there, and I would stay extra time to listen to the students and try to help them figure things out. This spring, like all of us, I worked extra times, and I was available to my students to talk not just about the class I'm teaching. They talked to me about the relatives, the parents, the people they lost. I listened to my students who were sick themselves. Like, I was there for them to hear and to actually to take their pain and try to ease it and try to hear what they have to say, right? I still hear from my students who send me messages, and it's actually the best feeling, much better than anything that CUNY Central or Chancellor can send, is these emails I get from students who are telling me about their lives. And I was there, and I'm going to wrap up. I know we're running out of time. I do want to say that getting this half-page note after all of that was disappointing. I was let go, and there was no email-wide notice telling me, thanking me for my service. You know how when you're retired, if you're full-time, you may get a thank you note that's sent to all CUNY. I didn't get that thank you note. As a matter of fact, if I died, I doubt it would even be acknowledged, right? Like, you don't hear about, oh, you know, we lost one of our adjuncts. So, like I said, you know, I give more attention and more care to a random water bug in my house that we get as adjunct professors from CUNY. CUNY, my water bug, I took it to the Rosebush. CUNY basically is cutting off my health insurance and my ability to have a decent life. So enough is enough. If CUNY will not respect us, workers and students, I would like to ask all of us to say no, and we will find out by the end of August. I would ask that we do refuse to work if they're not going to treat us like human beings. And I'm going to wrap up with a quote from Angela Davis, who said, if they come for me in the morning, they will come for you in the night. Thank you.
So where shall I begin? I think that something that's approach that may be appropriate to this situation is the great W.B. Du Bois's quote from the early 20th century, in which he said that the struggle of the 20th century would be the struggle of a color line. Perhaps some people might think that that is back in the 20th century, but it has followed us forward into the 21st century. Already in the 21st century, African Americans had 1/10 the average cumulative wealth of the rest of the country. They had extraordinarily high incarceration rates, low death rates. In fact, they were like African Americans existed sort of like separate from America in almost every demographic category. We move forward and we're hit by coronavirus, and all the problems of Black America literally exploded. I mean, on top of that, there was police brutality, which led to the students to go out into the streets and led young people to go out in the streets with their justice and peace slogans. All of that was reflected into our experience at Medgar Evers. even before the crisis, we were drastically underfunded. We had some of the most poorest, least well-off students in all of CUNY. What happens then? When the coronavirus hit them like a ton of bricks, I had student after student come to me and tell me that they were sick. They could no longer participate in the classrooms. The surrounding communities had coronavirus infection rates of up to 45%. That particular number is from Flatlands, which is the adjoining community. My students had extraordinarily difficulty getting computers. I had extraordinarily high dropout rates in the spring semester. On top of that, to redouble it is the fact that the college was deeply in debt and the president resigned. So to a degree, Medgar Evers has twice the problems of every other community, and probably has twice the problem of any other community, any other CUNY college. We're faced with a desperate situation, which we were already faced with a desperate situation, and the coronavirus has aggravated. It has particularly hit hard the adjuncts at Medgar Evers. Medgar Evers has one of the highest rates of adjuncts being given letters of non-reappointment. We out there are engaging in the struggle. We've marched, we've demonstrated. We've petitioned the president, we've petitioned the chancellor, we work with the PSC. As we stand now, and to look back, if you look back at the previous semester, almost every other day in the email, there was some relative or some faculty member, some staff member, some faculty member or staff member's relative who had passed on. It was the most morbid of all situations that you could imagine. Students without computers, students who were sick, all at extremely high rates. So, but all of this is not simply a reflection of the coronavirus. As I said before, it's a reflection of the entrenched institutional, racial, and class inequities in the United States. So given those realities, it will take an extraordinary effort on the part of all of us to not only take on the current situation, but the deeply embedded class and racial inequalities that go far beyond the coronavirus. So for us, it's not even a question of the coronavirus or the Freedom Summer, as I call it. It's a question of what Amilcar Cabral, the great Ghanaian revolutionary, called a luta continua, the struggle continues. So at this juncture, though, we need to all band together and fight these cutbacks and fight these inequalities. Thank you.
It's important to take in what Jasmina and David were saying, because they're speaking for all those who have been impacted by CUNY's cruel policies. Part-time faculty and staff of 10, 15, 20 years are being laid off all over CUNY. And as David pointed out, it has an extraordinary impact on students who are already disadvantaged by a racist, classist system. You know, I've seen class sizes balloon from 40 to 75 students. How is it possible that a class last semester that was 40 students is suddenly okay at 75? They're taking advantage of the fact that you can now cram in more students onto a Zoom meeting or into Blackboard than you could under the fire code of most of the classrooms that we teach in. So what's happening is they're warehousing students, and their students are suffering. You know, a single teacher in whatever class can't possibly devote enough time and energy to the students that are in there, because what's happening is we're in the middle of a pandemic and everybody is affected. What also has been said, and there's research that indicates that the maximum amount of students in an online class should be 12. Like, I don't know how you get from 12 to 75. You know, I heard someone say that CUNY administrators think you can teach 300 students from your living room. And that's just not true. So their policies, their stuffing, warehousing of students in classes, their firing adjuncts is is making us all suffer, right? We all suffer. Education suffers, and CUNY suffers. Earlier this month, the PSC filed for a preliminary injunction against CUNY, demanding that they rehire those laid off using the CARES Fund. Matt Sapienza, who is the Senior Vice Chancellor and Chief Financial Officer, stated in his declaration that by laying off 2,800 faculty, part-time faculty and staff, we were going to save $30 million a semester. Because honestly, that's all we are. We're numbers on a balance sheet, right? He implied also that this layoff was kind of almost normal because people were non-reappointed every semester. So laying off 2,800 people, that was a perfectly normal occurrence. And you know, as we are only numbers on a balance sheet, it's easy to move us around, right? Teachers, students, goals, aspirations, nothing. We're just a dollar amount. And that dollar amount is reported to the governor, right? So he's done his job. And, you know, $60 million, by the way, is only 2% or less than 2% of the actual CUNY budget. So they're going to save themselves on the backs of the most contingent, most precarious workers. CUNY is going to save themselves on our backs, on the backs of those people who are already in tenuous positions. And, you know, we started out today by naming those in our university and honoring those in our university who have died from COVID. And we're making them known. We're making everyone know who these people were. And that's what we need to do for every single staff, student, and faculty member in CUNY. We need them to know who we are and what we do. And the way we do that is we have to make them know our names. So what I'm going to ask everybody is to make them know your name, to show up and make them know who you are, to write, to go to speak to every single opportunity you get, to make them know who you are and what you do for this university, because we need them to know that they're not just firing a number on a balance sheet, that we are actually the people who make this university run. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm just going to talk briefly about what happened to us at BMCC that connects so much with what other people have already said. At BMCC, we had over 108 non-reappointed adjuncts. 108 non-reappointed adjuncts. Over half of those were from one department. And I talked to a lot of them. Some of them are gradually getting their jobs back, but it goes to what Yasmina said, probably, maybe, it's that fear and uncertainty that's really been a way to control people. You have to do this, you have to do that, and then maybe you'll get your job back. These are dedicated instructors who bought equipment with their own money, spent money on Wi-Fi access that they hadn't had before, taught themselves how to teach online, dedicated so much extra time in March and April on quality teaching, and took classes in how to teach online, all without being compensated. And then we're told, oh, you're non-reappointed. And some of them are getting their jobs back. But again, I have to say the way of doing this, of creating extra fear and extra uncertainty, has been horrible. And I think even though that's a picture of BMCC, that goes to all of the adjuncts across CUNY who've been non-reappointed, who've been fired, essentially. And that's it. That's all I'm going to say.
Good afternoon. I'll add my thanks to all of you for joining us. As others have said, I'd also like to say thank you to the Fight Back Thursdays organizers for putting this vigil together, along with all of the wonderful organizing work they've done throughout the summer. They've given up their time and their summer to fight for what is right, and we all owe them our thanks. Yeah, this vigil really is a great and fitting conclusion to these Fight Back Thursdays. You know, when you hear the names read, it really does emphasize the work we've all been doing this summer and really what is at stake. And it's our objective to fight to make sure that that list of names that was read does not grow. And if it does grow, that it's not due to CUNY's continuing failure to lead, okay, and continuing failure of their obligation to their students, to their employees, and to the city. Okay. Throughout the whole summer, whenever we deal with these issues, I'm often reflecting on a meeting I had along with my DC 37 colleague with our senior leadership back in March, right as we were shutting down. And she and I were strongly demanding that while the teaching faculty had been sent home, they had not sent any of the professional staff or the DC 37 colleagues home. And it was a very contentious meeting that did result several hours later in people beginning to be sent home. And we now know that the virus was rampant in our communities at that time. And each day that people were exposed, thousands more were at risk. And it really does bring home the fight. It's not an intangible fight. It's a real fight about safety and about people's lives. It will take years for us to come to terms with what we've lost, not only as a university, but our whole society. It is important that we mourn the loss of our colleagues across CUNY, and while at the same time preparing for our future. As our pandemic continues, we're all preparing to begin a new semester, those of us who still have our jobs. Unfortunately, CUNY and our government have decided that we'll be doing this without many of our colleagues as we begin. Some of our colleagues at Kingsborough have been serving our students for over 20 years and were unceremoniously tossed. These are our colleagues who staff our writing center, our laboratories, our studios, work in student advisements, and in all other aspects of our student services. And our college will be a lesser place for their loss. Earlier in the summer, our union, your union, fought for our member safety at Kingsborough when Kingsborough unilaterally resumed on-campus instruction in several of its programs before New York City had even entered phase 4, and without any official safety protocols in place, nothing published, no approval from government health officials. And the PSC did go to court, and we were able to put a stop to this. And CUNY shut their illegal activity down within hours of our court filing. So our fight for safety and our health is very real and very going forward, because it does show what will happen if the PSC is not there to fight for not only our members' safety, but the safety of everyone at CUNY. This summer, Kingsborough eliminated over 100 non-teaching adjunct CLT, and college assistant positions. CUNY is projecting that 20 PSC represented employees will lose their health insurance. That's 25% of the part-time PSC represented employees at Kingsborough will not have health insurance. Like most of our colleges, the overwhelming majority of our courses will be fully conducted online this fall. And given the nature of our situation, that is the only responsible choice. But looking further down the road, we're faced with the prospect, and this deeply concerns me, that our facilities will not permit us to return in any significant capacity for the foreseeable future, at least until the pandemic is ended. We have endured decades of underfunding, austerity, and deferred maintenance, and these have, in many instances, left us with, like all schools, outdated HVAC systems and an overall infrastructure that's wholly unsuited for our challenges ahead. And it's important to note, I think, that CUNY's lack of interest in health and safety is not a new crisis. It's a manufactured crisis that's been decades in the making. Every budget cut, every deferred maintenance for decades has left us ill-prepared and operating on no margin, and we all have seen the results now. While Kingsborough's administration did not actually emulate the poor choices, very poor choices made by many other CUNY institutions when they failed to reappoint thousands of teaching adjuncts, our 6-month and annually appointed adjuncts have endured a summer that has been filled with endless anxiety. As so many others have so eloquently spoken just before me, particularly touched by what Kathleen had just said about contingency and control. CUNY calls it flexibility, but it's really about control. And the less they tell you, the less they communicate, the more they can control. Okay. We have been watching with alarm across CUNY as our enrollment numbers continue to sag. And our teaching adjuncts know all too well what that portends for them next month if the enrollment continues to drop. We're already starting to see the first course cancellations take place, which will mean more people losing jobs, more people losing their health coverage. And our fight to save all of our jobs and to maintain the health and safety and make sure that we are not brought back until it is safe will continue throughout the fall and as long as it takes. Again, my thanks to the organizers. We are mourning the loss of those we've lost, and we wish peace to their families, their friends, and their loved ones who've left behind, and look forward to a day when this is over and we can be together again in person. Thank you.